The observatory was a skeletal titan of iron, perched precariously upon the frozen spine of the world where the air was too thin for common breath. Inside, the atmosphere was a heavy shroud of silence, smelling of cold brass and the ancient, metallic scent of starlight captured through glass. In the center of the vast, shadowed hall, the primary telescope rested on a base of solid granite, its long copper body aimed at the swirling white chaos of the blizzard outside. Every few minutes, a massive internal gear would click with a deep, resonant thud, a mechanical heartbeat that vibrated through the stone floor and into the very marrow of the bones. The walls were lined with rows of iron cabinets, their drawers filled with thousands of glass plates that held the frozen images of nebulae and dying suns. A single lantern sat on a nearby oak desk, its amber flame flickering weakly against the immense, blue darkness that pressed against the reinforced window panes. The sound of the wind was not a scream, but a low-frequency hum, a constant vibration that made the crystal dome overhead groan under the shifting weight of the ice. There was no warmth here, only the absolute preservation of a stillness that had existed since the mountain was born. To stand beneath the great lens was to feel the crushing scale of the universe, a sensation that reduced the noise of the human mind to a single, quiet point of light. The rhythmic tapping of sleet against the metal roof acted as a natural metronome, a steady pulse that grounded the senses in the cold reality of the high altitude. Every breath was a sharp, clean intake of oxygen, chilling the throat and clearing the thoughts until only the observation of the storm remained. The heavy curtains of velvet nearby remained unmoving, frozen in place by the sheer density of the silent air. In this place, time was not a sequence of events, but a stationary ocean of shadow and frost, waiting for the morning that felt 1,000 years away. Deep within the observatory's circular archive, the scent of parched vellum and old leather mingled with the metallic tang of the frozen air. Each shelf held the weight of a century's worth of quiet observation, a library of shadows that stood motionless against the relentless percussion of the wind. The massive iron clockwork mechanism hummed with a low vibration that felt like a physical pressure against the chest. In this room, the concept of a minute was stripped of its urgency, replaced by the grand rotation of brass wheels that moved with the indifference of the planets themselves. A heavy iron stove sat in the corner, its fire long extinguished, yet its surface still held the faint, smoky aroma of ancient embers. Every shadow cast by the singular, flickering lamp seemed to stretch toward the domed ceiling, creating a dance of silhouettes that mimicked the distant constellations. To lean against the cold stone wall was to feel the immense power of the mountain, a silent giant that remained unbothered by the frozen chaos of the blizzard. The brass adjustment knobs on the star charts were cold to the touch, their surfaces polished by hands that had sought order in the deep sky. There was a profound sense of isolation here, a sanctuary where the frantic pace of the human world was simply irrelevant. The high-pitched whistle of the wind through the window sills sounded like an ethereal flute, a melody that only the mountains could compose. One could almost feel the weight of the ice building up on the exterior of the dome, a thick, white armor that sealed the observer into absolute and restorative solitude. Every creak of the floorboards was a reminder of the structure's age, a sturdy vessel of iron that had weathered 1,000 storms without flinching. In this silence, the mind found a heavy peace, settling into the rhythmic pulse of the machinery like a sleeper drifting into a dreamless and permanent rest. The heavy oak table in the center of the hall was covered with sprawling star maps, their edges curled and yellowed by decades of mountain humidity. A brass compass, heavy and cold, rested atop a chart of the northern hemisphere, its needle shivering slightly whenever a particularly strong gust of wind struck the exterior of the dome. There was no electronic hum in this sanctuary, only the mechanical poetry of weights and pulleys that governed the telescope's slow, sweeping movements across the void. The oil inside the lantern burned with a steady, noiseless flame, casting a golden pool of light that felt like a tiny island in a vast, blue ocean of frost. To breathe here was to taste the very essence of the high peaks, a crisp and unpolluted air that seemed to sharpen the senses while dulling the anxieties of the world below. Outside, the blizzard had turned the world into a featureless white blur, erasing the horizon and leaving the observatory as the only solid point in a chaotic universe. The massive iron chains that held the dome's shutter in place were coated in a thin layer of crystalline ice, sparkling like diamonds in the dim, reflected light. Every gear turn was a testament to a time when things were built to last for eternity, a sturdy defiance against the erosive power of the storm. One could feel the rhythmic pulse of the mountain through the soles of their boots, a deep, tectonic vibration that resonated with the low-frequency humming of the iron structure. In this place, the mind ceased its frantic searching, settling instead into the comforting patterns of the mechanical and the celestial. The darkness in the corners of the room was not empty, but filled with the peaceful presence of a history dedicated to watching the silent stars. It was a place where one could finally let go of the day, surrendering to the vast and restorative embrace of the eternal night. Moving toward the spiral staircase of forged iron, the air grew even colder, carrying the sharp scent of the frozen sleet that battered the high windows. Each step produced a muted, metallic ring that echoed softly through the vaulted heights of the observatory, a sound that was quickly swallowed by the thick silence. From this vantage point, the great telescope looked like a silent guardian of the peaks, its brass fittings gleaming with a ghostly, subterranean light. The intricate lenses, polished to a perfect clarity, held the stillness of the cosmos within their curved depths, waiting for the storm to break. On a small side table sat a porcelain cup, the tea inside cold and forgotten, its surface reflecting the rhythmic flickering of the distant gas lamps. There was a profound sense of safety within these thick stone walls, a feeling of being protected from the elemental fury that sought to reclaim the mountain. The heavy velvet curtains near the observation slit were frozen into stiff, elegant folds, acting as an extra layer of insulation against the biting chill of the blizzard. One could imagine the great gears below continuing their tireless work, tracking stars that remained hidden behind the thick, grey curtain of the winter sky. This was a realm where the ego dissolved into the scale of the machinery, leaving only a pure, observational awareness of the present moment. The sound of the wind had become a background texture, a white noise that served only to deepen the internal quiet of the sanctuary. Here, the weight of responsibility and the noise of ambition were replaced by the simple, grounding reality of the cold and the dark. The shadows seemed to breathe in unison with the shifting of the mountain, a slow and ancient rhythm that promised a rest beyond the reach of time. Every detail, from the rusted bolt to the silk star chart, felt permanent and significant in the absolute stillness. The final hour of the watch brought a deepening of the blue shadows, as the observatory settled further into the frozen grip of the peak. The lantern on the desk began to dim, its flame shrinking to a small, intense point of amber that cast long, dramatic fingers of light across the stone floor. Outside, the blizzard continued its relentless march, a swirling dance of ice and wind that felt as old as the world itself. Within the dome, the massive brass telescope remained a statue of perfect patience, its mechanical heart beating with the slow, deliberate rhythm of the heavy weights. The scent of wood smoke from a distant, hidden chimney drifted faintly through the structure, a ghost of a warmth that served only to emphasize the beautiful coldness of the hall. To sit in the high-backed wooden chair was to feel the support of a century of observers, a lineage of silence that stretched back into the forgotten reaches of history. The frost on the windows had grown into intricate, fern-like patterns, obscuring the chaos outside and turning each pane into a work of natural art. There was no longer any need to watch the sky. The observatory itself had become the destination, a vessel of peace floating in a sea of winter. The rhythmic clicking of the escapement wheel was the only clock that mattered, a steady and hypnotic pulse that guided the spirit toward a deep and restorative slumber. Every muscle in the body seemed to mimic the stillness of the iron pillars, finding a heavy and effortless relaxation in the absence of light. As the final gear turned with a muffled, satisfying thud, the world outside and the world within became one singular, silent entity. The journey through the storm had reached its quietest point, leaving nothing but the pure, unadulterated essence of the frozen sanctuary. In this absolute quiet, the mind finally surrendered to the weight of the night, falling away into a dreamless and eternal peace beneath the giant, silent lens. The great lens, a massive disk of polished crystal, seemed to vibrate with the silent energy of the distant nebulae it was designed to capture. Even through the thick layer of the blizzard, one could feel the immense, focused clarity of the glass, a cold eye that never blinked in the face of the eternal night. On the lower deck of the observatory, the heavy iron furnaces stood like dormant giants, their dormant iron shells radiating a sense of ancient, solid strength. The oil in the scattered lamps was thick and slow-moving in the chill, causing the light to take on a syrupy, golden quality that clung to the edges of the brass instruments. There was a profound rhythmic quality to the sound of the frost expanding against the exterior stones, a series of sharp, microscopic cracks that punctuated the low hum of the wind. To walk along the perimeter was to witness the sheer thickness of the mountain silence, a weight that seemed to press all unnecessary thoughts out of the mind. The intricate star globes, made of silver and lapis lazuli, sat on their pedestals like miniature versions of the universe, unmoving and perfect in their frozen geometry. Every breath felt as though it were being drawn from a source of absolute purity, a high-altitude stillness that cleansed the spirit of the day's clutter. The mechanical heart of the dome continued its slow, grinding rotation, a movement so deliberate that it could only be perceived by the occasional click of a heavy bronze tooth. In this place, the concept of the future was as irrelevant as the memories of the past. There was only the persistent, frozen present. The shadows between the pillars grew longer and deeper, becoming soft sanctuaries for the weary eyes to rest upon. Every detail of the observatory, from the cold iron rivets to the velvet-lined telescope cases, served as a reminder of the beauty of isolation. At the base of the great telescope, a complex array of mercury-filled gauges pulsed with a slow, hypnotic rhythm, monitoring the atmospheric pressure of the storm. The liquid metal inside moved with a heavy grace, reflecting the dim amber light of the room in a series of shimmering, silver waves. There was an undeniable sense of being inside a great, living machine, a vessel of logic and stone that was sailing through a sea of white chaos. The wooden floorboards, darkened by age and the oils of 1,000 technicians, absorbed the sound of every movement, creating an acoustic environment of absolute softness. Above, the intricate network of support beams and pulleys was lost in the deep blue shadows of the vaulted ceiling, appearing like the ribcage of a massive, resting creature. To stand in the center of the hall was to be at the exact pivot point of the world, a place where gravity and starlight met in a perfect, silent embrace. The wind outside seemed to be whispering ancient secrets against the reinforced glass, a language of ice and altitude that the mind understood without words. Every adjustment screw on the meridian circle was cold and solid, a tactile anchor that grounded the senses in the physical reality of the laboratory. The silence here was not a lack of sound, but a presence of immense, restorative peace that flowed through the iron structure like a slow-moving river. One could feel the tension leaving the body, replaced by the steady, mechanical pulse of the tracking gears. The world below, with its frantic noise and constant motion, felt like a fading dream from a different life. In the observatory, the night was a vast and generous host, offering a sanctuary of shadow where the soul could finally find its equilibrium. Every gear tone was a promise of continued stability in an ever-shifting universe. As the deepest part of the night descended, the observatory became a temple of absolute and unyielding focus. The flickering light from the final lamp played across the rows of leather-bound journals, illuminating the handwritten coordinates of stars that had not been seen for months. Each page held the essence of a quiet life dedicated to the sky, a legacy of patience that resonated through the cold, still air. The heavy iron door that led to the outer balcony remained sealed tight, its edges rimmed with a thick layer of frost that looked like delicate white lace. Inside, the warmth was not a matter of temperature, but a feeling of profound belonging within the heart of the mountain's machinery. The rhythmic clicking of the master clock provided a comforting, steady heartbeat for the entire hall, a reminder that time was passing with grace and precision. Every shadow in the room had become a soft bed for the imagination, a place where the mind could drift among the galaxies without ever leaving the chair. The great brass weights, suspended by heavy steel cables, hung motionless in the dark, their immense mass providing the energy that kept the telescope alive. To observe the stillness of the room was to participate in a ritual as old as the stars themselves, a surrender to the beauty of the dark and the cold. The air remained crisp and invigorating, a constant reminder of the high altitude and the purity of the winter storm. In this final stretch of the watch, the boundaries between the observer and the observatory seemed to dissolve, leaving only a singular awareness of the peaceful night. The journey was not about reaching a destination, but about existing within the perfect, mechanical harmony of the sanctuary. As the gears continued their silent work, the weight of the universe felt light and manageable, a beautiful mystery to be witnessed in silence. The peace of the observatory was a gift of the frost, a deep and enduring rest. The great pendulum in the lower hall continued its rhythmic, heavy swing, a golden disc cutting through the cool air with hypnotic precision and a low, resonant hum that echoed deep within the stone floor. Each pass was a profound vibration that seemed to resonate with the very foundation of the mountain, acting as a steady, mechanical heartbeat for the silent observatory. On the massive iron pillars, the frost had begun to form intricate, crystalline maps that looked like forgotten galaxies etched in white against the dark, cold metal. The silence in the archive was so thick it felt like a physical substance, a heavy velvet cushion that absorbed the distant, muffled roars of the wind outside the dome. Every brass cogwheel in the tracking system was coated in a thin, protective film of oil, reflecting the dim moonlight like dark, liquid silk as the gears turned. There was no sense of hurry here, only the grand, geological pace of the mountain and the ancient stars above. To watch the tiny dust motes floating in the lantern's final glow was to see a miniature universe in motion, drifting through the perfect stillness of the room. The scent of ancient stone and cold metal was grounding, a reminder of the structure's permanence in an ever-shifting world of ice. Every mechanical click of the secondary gears was a promise of continued stability, a small, reassuring sound in the vast, blue darkness of the hall. The heavy velvet-lined boxes that held the spare lenses remained closed, their silver latches gleaming like cold stars in the deepening shadows. One could feel the immense pressure of the storm pressing against the walls, a force that only served to make the sanctuary within feel even more secure. This was the peak of isolation, where the soul could finally shed the noise of existence and settle into the quiet, eternal rhythm of the iron. The night had become a living entity, a silent companion that shared the observatory's long vigil. The spiral staircase of forged iron felt like a spine connecting the earth to the heavens, each step cold and unyielding under the soles of the heavy, leather boots. From the upper observation deck, the great telescope appeared even more massive, a copper and brass giant that had witnessed 1,000 winters without once flinching. The air at this height was even sharper, carrying the crystalline purity of the high-altitude blizzard that raged beyond the thick glass panes of the dome. On a nearby workstation, a set of precision calipers lay beside a hand-drawn map of the lunar craters, their polished surfaces catching the blue tint of the stormlight from outside. There was an immense beauty in the functionality of the room, where every bolt and every gear had a singular, noble purpose in the study of the great void. The rhythmic tapping of the sleet against the dome had slowed to a gentle, crystalline whisper, as if the storm itself were becoming exhausted by its own chaotic fury. Inside the hall, the shadows between the massive cabinets were deep and inviting, offering a safe place for the mind to wander without any set direction or worry. The great clockwork weights continued their slow, imperceptible descent through the darkness, providing the silent energy that kept the celestial hunt alive for centuries. Every breath was a calm, deliberate act, a way of synchronizing the human body with the slow, mechanical pulse of the building. The sound of a distant, internal gear shifting was the only indicator that the world was still turning beneath the heavy layers of ice. In this sanctuary, the weight of the past was as light as the falling snow, and the future was nothing more than the next rhythmic click of the brass. The isolation was not a burden, but a rare and precious gift, a chance to exist in a state of pure observation. The observatory was a vessel of light, drifting peacefully through the endless night toward a horizon of absolute peace for the mind. Near the primary meridian circle, the air was still enough to hear the microscopic contraction of the metal as it adjusted to the deepening cold of the mountain peak. The intricate star globes, etched with the names of forgotten constellations, sat in their wooden cradles like silent messengers from a distant, golden age of discovery. Outside, the blizzard had created massive drifts against the dome, a white shroud that muffled the world even further and intensified the feeling of being in a hidden world. Every adjustment wheel on the telescope's mounting was a work of art, their knurled edges providing a tactile connection to the absolute precision of the heavens. The light from the single remaining gas lamp was a warm, beating heart in a sea of cool blue shadows, a beacon of human curiosity in the freezing wilderness. To lean over the star charts was to feel the vastness of space pressing against the smallness of the room, a sensation that was both humbling and profoundly peaceful. The rhythmic creaking of the dome as it settled into the ice was a natural melody, a song of iron and winter that resonated in the very marrow of the bones. There was a sense of profound order here, a place where the laws of physics and the beauty of the stars were the only things that truly mattered anymore. The heavy iron stove, though cold, stood as a monument to the endurance of those who had watched this dark sky long before our time. Every shadow cast by the telescope's long neck seemed to tell a story of a silent discovery, a moment of absolute clarity found in the heart of the darkness. The mind had become as still as the water in the mercury gauges, reflecting the peace of the observatory with perfect, undisturbed clarity. In this stillness, the boundaries of the self seemed to expand, reaching out toward the snowy horizon and the hidden stars far beyond the clouds. Every grain of dust was a star, and every shadow was a galaxy waiting to be explored in the quiet. As the final hours of the long vigil approached, the observatory felt like a world that had been completely forgotten by the flow of time and the noise of men. The silence was absolute, a heavy and restorative blanket that covered every brass fitting and every stone pillar in the vast, vaulted hall. The blizzard outside had finally begun to thin, leaving a world of soft, swirling mists and the faint, ghostly glow of a moon hidden behind the thick clouds. Inside, the great telescope remained a sentinel of starlight, its mechanical heart beating with the same slow, faithful rhythm it had held for a century. The scent of the cold air was now mixed with the faint, sweet smell of the aging paper in the archives, a comforting aroma of history and peace. Every gear in the tracking system had reached its final position for the night, a perfect alignment that mirrored the silent harmony of the celestial spheres. To sit in the stillness was to participate in the ultimate act of rest, a surrender to the vast and generous darkness of the mountain peak. The shadows were now a deep, indigo blue, soft and velvet-like, inviting the weary eyes to close and the spirit to drift. The rhythmic clicking of the master clock was the only sound left, a steady pulse that led the way toward a deep and dreamless slumber. This was the final sanctuary, a place of iron and stone where the noise of the world could never reach. The journey through the storm had come to its end, leaving only the pure, unadulterated essence of the Frozen Observatory. In this absolute quiet, the weight of existence was finally lifted, replaced by the effortless peace of the eternal night. The telescope, the gears, and the frost remained, silent witnesses to a rest that was as vast as the sky itself, sheltering the mind until the first light of a new day arrives in the east. The world was at rest, and so was the watcher, beneath the great lens of time. The great library of the observatory, a circular room adjacent to the main dome, held the collective silence of 1,000 sleepless nights. Here, the walls were lined with towering mahogany shelves that reached toward the shadows of the ceiling, each one packed with hand-bound astronomical journals and leather portfolios of stellar photography. The air was still and carried the dry, comforting scent of old paper and the faint, lingering aroma of beeswax used to polish the wooden cabinets. Outside, the blizzard had transformed into a ghostly, silent drift of snow that clung to the outer masonry like a thick, white velvet skin. Inside the library, a single brass lamp burned with a steady flame, its light reflecting softly off the glass doors of the bookcases and the polished surface of the heavy reading table. Every footstep on the thick, woven carpet was muffled, creating an acoustic environment that was as quiet as the void between the stars. To sit in the high-backed velvet chair was to feel the immense weight of the mountain's history, a lineage of quiet observation that had never been interrupted by the noise of the world. The intricate mechanical clock on the mantel ticked with a slow, deliberate cadence, each second a precious drop of time in the vast ocean of the night. One could feel the deep, grounding peace of being surrounded by the recorded wisdom of the heavens, a sanctuary where every word and every number had been written in the service of the light. The shadows in the corners of the room felt protective and warm, a contrast to the biting blue chill that existed just a few feet away beyond the reinforced glass. This was a place for reflection, a room where the mind could finally settle into the deep grooves of thought and find a profound, restorative rest. The observatory's heart continued to beat in the next room, but here, the silence was sovereign and absolute, a perfect ending to the long journey through the storm. Near the base of the primary gears, the massive counterweights hung in the darkness like obsidian monoliths, their immense mass ensuring the telescope's steady movement against the rotation of the Earth. The oil-slick chains that held them moved with a slow, imperceptible grace, producing a faint, metallic whisper that was only audible in the deepest moments of the night. In this lower chamber, the temperature was a constant, bracing cold that felt as though it had been preserved since the very birth of the mountain. Every bolt and every rivet in the support structure was a testament to the endurance of iron, a sturdy defiance against the erosive power of the elements that raged outside the dome. To touch the cold surface of the granite pillars was to feel the very pulse of the planet, a tectonic vibration that resonated with the low-frequency hum of the high-altitude winds. The shadows here were long and dramatic, cast by the flickering light of the safety lanterns that lined the perimeter of the machinery. There was a profound sense of security in the sheer scale of the engineering, a feeling of being cradled within a vessel that was built to weather any storm. The rhythmic clicking of the escapement wheel provided a hypnotic background melody, a sound that encouraged the spirit to let go of its final anxieties and embrace the heavy peace of the night. Every breath was a sharp, clear intake of frozen air, a sensation that sharpened the awareness while calming the heart. In this mechanical subterranean world, the noise of the human ego was entirely absent, replaced by the grand and beautiful logic of the machine and the stars. The observatory had become a temple of stillness, a place where the movement of the universe was the only thing that remained relevant. As the final gear of the hour turned, the world seemed to hold its breath in anticipation of a dawn that was still hours away, leaving the sanctuary in a state of perfect, frozen equilibrium. The final transition into the pre-dawn hours brought a unique and crystalline silence to the high observatory, a moment when even the wind seemed to bow before the coming light. Inside the main hall, the blue shadows had reached their maximum depth, turning the brass and copper of the great telescope into ghostly, shimmering silhouettes. The scent of the night was at its most intense, a mixture of frozen ozone, old lubricants, and the ancient dust of the mountain. Every surface was cold to the touch, yet the atmosphere within the dome felt remarkably safe and welcoming, a cocoon of iron and stone floating in a sea of white winter. The rhythmic tapping of the sleet had completely stopped, replaced by a profound stillness that allowed the mind to hear its own quietest thoughts. To observe the star charts one last time was to acknowledge the beauty of the unknown, a surrender to the mystery of the cosmos that was both humbling and deeply restorative. The great lens remained clear and expectant, a perfect eye that had faithfully captured the light of 1,000,000 suns throughout the long vigil. Every gear tooth and every pulley was now at rest, having fulfilled its duty in the mechanical dance of the heavens. The flickering amber flame of the last lantern was a small, defiant spark in the vast indigo darkness, a symbol of the persistence of the human spirit in the face of the infinite. In this absolute quiet, the weight of the world was finally lifted, leaving only a sense of profound gratitude for the sanctuary of the storm. The peace of the observatory was not just a lack of noise, but a presence of immense, enduring harmony that filled every corner of the vaulted ceiling. As the first, imperceptible hint of grey began to touch the eastern horizon, the sanctuary remained a place of perfect and eternal rest. The journey through the night was complete, leaving the mind in a state of absolute, dreamless peace beneath the silent, watchful gaze of the great copper giant.